Hello everyone and welcome to this chapter. In today's chapter, we'll be focusing on how to paint your 3D object. Now, for those of you who are familiar with programs such as Photoshop, Clip Paint and all of those software, you will probably like this video because we're going to teach you how to paint your 3D object inside Blender. So, now before I get started, I want to say that one of the hardest aspects of Blender is knowing what feature that Blender supports, and especially knowing the feature is not only that, right? Knowing how to use those features is even harder because especially like the shader editor over here is quite hard to get the grasp of what is going on right over here, right guys? So in this video, I'm going to teach you two methods on how to paint your 3D object. One is going to be harder than the other. However, the harder method is going to teach you what is going on behind the scene and to show you the in and out of how 3D painting works. So what I'm going to do is that I want to start with the harder method first before I go into the easier method. So if you want to, you can just sit back and relax as I go through and explain the hard part first, and then I will show you the easier method later on in this video, which we will use to paint our 3D scene. So now let's get started with the hard method first. So as you can see over here, I have this toon shader that we created in the previous episode, right? So it's just the diffuse BSDF to calculate the light and shadow. This converts the shader data into a color data. Then we can just put the color ramp to map the dark and bright, color with these colors right over here. So now, as you can see, we have just this simple setup, which doesn't allow us to paint on top of our object, right? Because, well, if we want to paint on top of our object, we obviously have to add something more to this. As you can see, there's no texture being applied to this. So in order to paint, we have to have this one node right over here, this one special node called the image texture node, if I can spell it right, image texture node right over here. So this image texture node will basically grab an information from an image. You can open an image to locate an image on your computer, or you can create a new image inside the Blender. And so in this case, we want to paint a new image, right? We want to use a new clear image and we just want to paint on top of that. So I'm going to click new right over here, and I'm just going to name this properly, like paint over, just like this. And I'm just going to choose a transparent color, just like that, for my background. And I will click new image right over here. And now I have this image that I can paint on top. But obviously, this will not show up on our 3D view, right? Because this node right over here, this image texture node, is not connected to the material output, right guys? And so we can just connect it like this. However, we now just lost the the toon shader that we created before. So we want to mix between the two. So like, how do we do that? So of course, we can use a new node called the mix color node. So obviously this node will mix between two colors input. So we can just plug the toon shader to the A socket, plug this color right over here to the B socket, and the alpha, which is the transparency, to the factor, just like that. And then we can just plug this to the surface. And now it looks like this. Well, it looks exactly the same as, plugging the toon shader to the surface, just like this. However, if you remember, the image texture is totally transparent, right? So now what we can do is that we can paint some part of the image to make it not become transparent, So we can just go over here to the object mode. We have to change to some other mode. So we can go over here. Well, we are not going to go into edit mode anymore. We're just going to go over to texture paint mode because we want to paint this texture right over here, paint the image. And now in order to paint on top of this 3D model, we will have to change the mode to another mode that we haven't used before. So just click this. As you can see, we went to edit mode before. However, we're not going to go to that anymore. We're just going to jump over to texture paint mode because we want to paint the texture just like this. And once you're in texture paint mode, you have to select your image texture that we just created over here. This is the paint over image texture, right? So I'm just going to change this to paint over image right over here. And now I can paint on my 3D model just like that. Almost too easy, right guys? And to give you a little bit of perspective, if I just casually unplug this and plug this to the surface, just the toon shader over here, as you can see, the painted texture is gone, totally gone, because, well, it's not mixing, with the toon shader. It's just plugging the toon shader to the material output. And if you mix the image on top of this toon shader right over here, and now both of them are combined together and it shows up just like this. And that is almost too easy, right guys? Now you can paint anything on top of your 3D object. So what I can do is that maybe this part of the, the back part of the toon shader is quite, quite flat. So what I can do is that, well, I can just sample this color right over here by clicking Control, Shift, and X to sample some color right over here. I know that Control, Shift, and X is quite complex. So if you want to, you can just go to Edit Mode, Preferences, and change the, the hotkey right over at Key Maps right over here. So if you want to, you can do that. And now I can just select some different color just like this. And I can paint, the bottom part just like that to make it a little bit lighter, just like that. And just look at that, right guys? It looks very, very nicer, just like that. Almost too easy, right guys? So if you want to, you can plug your pen tablet and you can use pen tablets to paint on top of this, and Blender will work just fine with those things. So just sample color just like this, and you can paint anything on top of this. Just like that. Almost too easy, right guys? Just look at that. Wow, amazing. So I'm just going to use my mouse over here to just paint some texture right over here. Give it a little bit of that human touch, right guys? So I'm just going to do these kind of things to maybe paint some textures right over there. And that is almost too easy, right guys? Just give it some of that. You can reduce the strength to reduce the opacity of your brush if you want to, and just paint, the texture just like that. And just do all these things and just look at that. Look at that human touch right over there. It looks amazing, right guys? And just look at that, right guys? Now I've painted this circle right over here. And to compare this with the original one looks like this. And now I paint something on top and now it looks like this.